Thank you very much, everybody. I'm really excited to present here with my colleagues, Rob Tazalar and Jonathan Lewis, on the Fermilab Integrated Engineering Research Center. As a nod to the collaboration theme today, we're actually going to take a deep dive into our process and how we adapted the design process to collect the information, the scientific user information. So it's actually really interesting parlay off of some of the Q&A that was coming out of the last session. And I didn't get a chance to do it during the intro, so I'm going to do it really quickly right now. I wanted to give Martin Kirschenbaum a shout out. This was his idea, this whole theme of the collaborate and getting these presentations together and thinking about it in a different way. So shout out to Marvin, thank you so much. This has been immensely This is not going to be a theme. This is going to be an I2S whole thing, so I'm really appreciative. Okay, so here we are. To introduce myself, Dana Johns, I am the IERC project manager. I also lead our science and technology practice here at Cook at Will.
Can we introduce ourselves? Rob Tazalar from ARUP. I lead the ARUP engineering team. We're doing the structural, the MEP, acoustics, AV, everything in the architecture and civil for the most part.
Jonathan Lewis, senior scientist at Fermilab, until recently deputy head of the particle physics division, so leading a lot of the interactions with the scientific side.
Okay, so for our agenda here for the next half hour, we're really going to roll through and I'm going to have Jonathan take you through the history of Fermilab and the culture. And what that does is it really informs how we've adapted the design process for the IRC. It's actually a little bit unique. We took what is typically a framework that we go through to collect all of the various requirements that are actually coming up today, and we adapted it, and it really emulated the way that Fermilab works. So it's really a great celebration of their culture and their campus. So as you roll through, you'll actually learn a little bit more about Fermilab and their scientific objectives, and then that sets the stage for Rob and I to talk about the design process. And we'll highlight two case studies. We'll highlight a case study on how we got through to the establishing those clean room requirements, and then also we are designing a space that we call the hybrid lab, which is just that. It's a hybrid space that came from sort of evolution conversation. So with that, I'll actually go ahead and hand it over to Jonathan to talk about history.
Okay, go. Can everybody hear me? In the back? Good. Okay. So, first I'll tell you a little bit about the history of Fermilab. So, Fermilab was founded in 1967. Our founding director was Robert Wilson. And he said, I have always felt science, art, technology, and art are importantly connected. Indeed, scientists and technology seem to many scholars to have grown out of art. And art has really been art and architecture have been part of the framework of Fermilab. If you see this, for example, this tower in front that's drawn there, that's actually something that he designed. And there are sculptures throughout the site. It's something that we're really very, very proud of. So when Fermilab started, it took over the site of the sleepy village of Weston, Illinois. It was an 11-town kind of planned community. And they took over the buildings and put in offices and built labs next to them until the main facility was done. We still actually have some shops out there. But in fact, the accelerators were built. The larger ring, the larger ring here is the Tevatron, and that's the original main ring was there. That was operational about 1972. The Tevatron through 2011. The main building, then the high-rise Wilson Hall is here, and where we're building the IRC is there, because what we wanted to do is have a new facility where we could bring together scientists and engineers from detector and electronics and engineering that were development that were scattered about the lab. This accelerator here is the main injector, which is now what's driving our proton beams that are for our principal scientific program. So just another view here again, showing the high-rise, which is kind of an iconic building for Fermilab, and really unique in the DOE complex. Another thing is that we actually strive to do our work in concert and in harmony with nature. Fermilab has a herd of bison that are rather popular. People drive out from Chicago to show their kids the bison. It's 30 miles to the west, not too far. And about a square mile of restored tall grass prairie, which is actually inside of the Tempatron ring. We try to have a collaborative and friendly work environment. A lot of the design of the high-rise was considered in a way to make it collaborative, in a way where people had a rather small mean-free path before they were going to actually come and meet up with people and work with them. And that's something that we're trying to achieve with the IARC. So our vision then is to solve the mysteries of matter, energy, space, and time for the benefit of all. In that, we want to have a world-leading neutrino science program that's driven from our accelerators, to lead the nation in development of particle colliders and detectors for them, to lead discovery at the energy frontier, and to advance particle physics through measurements of the cosmos. Our planning process is driven by the whole community. There was what's called a national process that we had from 2012 to 2014, involving scientists from throughout the community who produced a strategic plan, which is known as the P5 plan for the particle physics prioritization panel. There's one missing. Okay, I'll think of it. Anyway, that led us to a 10-year strategic plan. The report was released in 2014. That established a number of science drivers for us. That then gets embodied into the Department of Energy's plans. So they also have a 10-year strategic plan of which Fermilab is a part. So in our program, we have 4 main elements. We have accelerator science and technology, we have advanced computing, we have particle physics, and we have large-scale user facilities that I'll tell you a little bit about. We want to make the best use of our core capabilities, of our people, and our infrastructure to advance the field of particle physics in the U.S. and to host the world for our neutrino program and other parts of our program. So our main plan then is to have our world-leading neutrino science program. With that, we are building a new superconducting linear accelerator called PIP2, which is going to be the first stage of our accelerator chain. We then have a chain of accelerators leading to the main injector, which is about 3 miles around. 3 kilometers around. And gives us 120 GeV proton beams. We're then building a new beam line, and it really is going to go up the hill and down the hill. And that's so we stay above the water table. That we're going to produce a beam of neutrinos. From that, we're going to put about 2.4 megawatts of power onto a target, which is about 2 meters of 2-meter pencil of graphite, and produce a beam of neutrinos that is going to go the 1,300 kilometers, and where we're building detectors in the site of a gold mine in Leeds, South Dakota. So we're hewing out large caverns. We're going to have about 40,000 tons of liquid argon for detecting the neutrinos about a mile underground. So not a small project. The whole thing together with the linear accelerator and the beamline and the detectors is about $3.5 billion. So it's our first, describing as the first international mega science project at a DOE national laboratory. So, so another important part of our program internationally, part of the international program, the highest priority is the program at the Large Hadron Collider. That's a facility at CERN in Geneva, Switzerland. Fermilab is a key partner and is actually the host lab for the U.S. component of one of the big experiments there. And so we have a strategic goal to maintain technical capabilities and so for that program, and so we need to renew and revitalize our detector R&D construction capabilities. So just a quick overview of our science objectives. First of all is as the host laboratory for the LBNF Dune project, LBNF Long Baseline Neutrino Facility. That's the facility that we're building. Dune is the experiment. That's actually international collaboration with, I believe now about 2,000 collaborators from 20 or 30 countries and 100 institutions. I don't know the exact numbers. So it's an enormous project, and Fermilab then is the host laboratory. So we're also the host laboratory for the U.S. contribution to the CMS experiment at the Large Hadron Collider. For this and for the Dune program, we need design and engineering and technical spaces, we need test spaces. In the case of the Dune program, we need actually to have large cryostats to be able to test detector elements in liquid argon. We need, for the CMS program, we need clean rooms for building silicon detectors and a number of electrical engineering facilities. We also are involved in cosmic science. We have built the detectors shown here, just for these array of these kind of detectors for detecting microwaves from the cosmic microwave background, packaged in Fermilab. We built the instrument that then went into this telescope at the South Pole. If you saw the picture of the black hole at the center of the galaxy, this telescope actually contributed to that black hole image. We also do precision science with particles called muons. We try to look at effects that are at the beyond the parts per trillion level to understand whether there are new interactions that can affect things in very rare processes and change our understanding of science. Again, this is the kind of thing for which we need advanced engineering and detector development spaces. We're also involved in quantum science. So we want to develop quantum sensors for doing particle physics, for elements such as detection of dark matter. And for this, we need a Kelvin-Kraustat laboratory, and again, space for testing and assembly and engineering of the elements that we're putting in there. So we had a set of science requirements which come down from these science objectives. We have detector R&D and detector construction for particle physics. This leads to, again, some of the things I've discussed. The low mass detectors for collider experiments at the LHC, development of custom integrated circuits for doing the experiments, because there's just not an off-the-shelf product. Everything is too fast for trying to do it in FPGA and too customized. where we have various kinds of flex circuits, cryogenic detectors, mechanical design, data acquisition, X-ray detectors. So we need lab spaces. We need dedicated labs for particular purposes. We also need big labs for putting together projects. A project for us might be 5 years, it might be 1 year. So we need that kind of flexibility where we could have an R&D project that's going on for a year, or we could have a large construction project that's going on for several years where we have to have areas for assembling pieces and then into modules, and then assembling the modules into the detector, and really doing some large construction. And again, to have all the office space to support all of that activity. So we started out, we got together, and we had kind of a kickoff team building meeting. And so we wanted to think about what are the ideas that we have for what this facility is going to be for us. So, so here, just to read it, it's to have a new state-of-the-art facility housing engineers and technicians. They're spread across the site, and to come together, be connected to Wilson Hall, and the goal then is to provide. The overall goal is to produce a place to improve science via this new optimized setting. Again, put engineers and scientists in close proximity, that they interact frequently, despite the vanishingly small social cross-section. Which is not really quite true. For one thing, there's the softball league. And then, again, so a little bit more visionary, to begin the tangible transition to the next 50 years of Fermilab. So as that transition, we're trying to consolidate people from various places in the site. So the green is that village space where we have a lot of lab areas. We have then this area here, which is the old beamline area, where we've repurposed buildings to be lab and assembly spaces. And then over here is the high-rise and in the kind of central campus, and also some what's called the technology campus here, where we built magnets and superconducting electromagnetic cavities. But the idea is to try to consolidate and get out of this residential area and in these 50-year-old industrial barns into modern spaces that are really purpose designed. So then this is a plan for the future. Again, the technical campus over here in the upper corner, and then the IARC adjacent to Wilson Hall. This is then where the new superconducting LINAC is, and then over here, this is the beamline for the long baseline neutrino facility. So really trying to consolidate and bring people together to be working together in the core of the campus.
Okay, so a lot of, there are a lot of requirements that we had to pull together. And for means of this presentation, I'm only going to talk about the scientific requirements, working with who we call the science points of contact, and then those departmental points of contact. There was a whole web of conversations related strictly to the architecture and the design, facilities, environmental health and safety, radiation safety, which I won't really go into. So for this case study, we're really talking about really determining what type of labs, who's in the labs, and what are these labs exactly. So this was one of our early lab tours where we were in the silicone detector, clean rooms, taking notes and listening to really that preliminary of how do you work and how do you want to work. The top diagram is showing how we originally set up our working group. So we worked with Fermilab. There were two science liaisons assigned, Eric Goschuk and Eileen Crowley, and they helped us map out really who these groups were, thinking through how they were going to work in IRC, but not really quite certain yet. So we had to start somewhere. We formatted those 5 groups, as you can read up at the top: the detector, R&D and construction, Dune and liquid argon, electrical and mechanical engineering in green, quantum cryo, and the last one is the computing for science. So the evolution of these groups, once we started getting into the needs a little bit more, actually morphed and adapted to what the building was doing during preliminary design. So you see sort of the end result of where we are right now. In final design, there's a couple things to note. These groups did relatively stay in the same form, but some of the working sessions actually broke out into two. We determined that we needed to dig a little deeper into a couple of these topics, which required some smaller groups. We also added some other science points of contacts into these groups to make sure we're getting the right information, and really just evolved the way that we were thinking. You can read most of those, but I just wanted to point out too in the green as it evolved, there were several different groups. We have the electrical engineering department, we have the particle physics department, we had the scientific computing department, and the real-time systems engineering department as well. So those all kind of came together from different parts of the campus. So it was really interesting for us. We're sitting in these rooms hearing these conversations of people who are thinking about how they will work together in the same space or kit of spaces that are currently in different locations on campus. So here's our process, right? So I started talking about we're sitting down, we're going to schedule these meetings, we're going to sit down and have a lot of these really large work sessions that typically you do when you're diving into a project, formatted on a certain rhythm. We looked at a bi-weekly rhythm for these conversations to dig in and get a lot of good information. So in preliminary design, you'll see we've got the 4 different work sessions. We framed them out and titled them, set objectives, and then followed up with action items. Once we got through preliminary design, we just determined that we needed to take, again, a step back and have some more less formal but more information gathering conversations. So we actually put a series of weekly phone calls on the calendar with the science points of contacts and Deepoks, which Jonathan Lewis was instrumental in helping us pull this information out of the various attendees and researchers going into the building. And it worked really, really well. So we were really adapting to the community culture. We kind of pulled out of what we needed to do to get to the end of the project, out of that rigid framework, and thought about how we wanted to make sure we're collecting the information correctly. So conversations are extremely fundamental, sitting down and having some of those side over as a design team, thinking about it the same way that you are, and then documenting it correctly. Visualization also comes into play. It's various modes of whether we're looking at it in Revit and visualizing it, whether we're looking at floor plans, whether we're looking at spreadsheets, just different modes to be able to collect that information. So right now we are approaching 60% final design. So we're currently still in design. One of the big reasons why we're not ready quite yet to show you the intricacies of what we're doing, but we wanted to talk through this process and how collaborative it's been. So here's just really a diagram, right? So we put together this pinwheel. We come with this process, and it works quite well to pull out a lot of the scientific requirements. But for this case, we were on this journey together, so we needed to adapt because we were all that end goal that we wanted to make sure that this facility met all of those goals that Jonathan highlighted and really is exemplifying what Fermilab is all about. So the first case study for the clean rooms, I'll turn over to Rob, and then I'll come back and talk about hybrid labs.
Thanks. I'm certain I'll go backwards a few times before I go forwards with this. So yeah, as Dana said, the process has been very iterative. It's been very involved with the client, and I'm just going to talk briefly about one of the particular labs. So one of the labs that we're going to discuss just a little bit here is a clean room. And this is an image of one of the existing clean rooms at the Silicon Detector Laboratory at Fermi. And I realize that some of you will probably be very familiar with clean rooms, and will notice that there's things that I miss in this discussion. Others may not be very familiar with clean rooms at all, but I'm just going to cover it in sort of a broad brush here. So one of the things with clean rooms is it's one of these things where the answer is always it depends. So we look at the classification for clean rooms is based based on how many particles of a certain size can be present within the space. And we've morphed from a federal standard to an ISO standard. They don't even match up across all different particle sizes, so it's kind of difficult to tell. ISO 7 is approximately the clean room that we need at Fermi, which is 10,000 particles. And even within that, you can see from the air change requirements that it can be anywhere from 30 to 90 air changes per hour. That's a pretty broad range as far as how much air we need to put into these clean rooms. So the process that we've had for this project and having good access to the researchers has been critical in allowing us to come up with a design that meets the needs but isn't crazy oversized or overblown for the project. As all projects are, this one, as all projects have, this has a budget, and you have to make sure that you are able to stay on the budget. So Dana threw this picture of me in and sort of thinking, well, great, now what do I do? How am I going to size this clean room? I don't know which type it is, but fortunately we were able to have the researchers assist us with it. And it's kind of interesting because clean rooms mean different things to different people. To one of the clean rooms meant there were no bees or rodents in his space. Fermi is an interesting place. It's got a lot of underground spaces. It's got a lot of shed buildings that are doing fabulous science in them. And the engineers and the researchers, Fermi's internal engineers and the researchers work very closely together to develop experiments and processes to test out these theories of stuff that just plain doesn't exist. So it's not the type of client, it's not the type of project where you can say, okay, here's the criteria, follow this, and go design it. This is completely different than that. So one of the things that we looked at after talking with the researchers is, okay, what is your current clean room? So in that clean room that we just looked at, we dug out the old drawings for it. Fermi provided those drawings. We did an evaluation and we saw, okay, so here's a clean room, and we're seeing that it's got about 22 air changes per hour in the space. It's a very high base space. That's got a coverage of around 7% for the ceiling panels. Both of these are quite low for what you would normally see for a class 10,000 clean room. One of the issues here is, go back a bit, oh, that would have been enough. You can kind of see that this is a very tall space, much taller than any of the people who are doing things and generating particles. And the reason for that is they move big stuff around. Our new clean room actually has traveling cranes in it. So you can probably come up with an expectation that that volume that exists above an 8-foot level isn't contributing to the particulates in the room. So do you include that in your volume calculation or not? It's another one of these judgment calls. So the existing clean room, just a little bit further here, and I move this along, essentially consisted of like Liebherr computer room units that are doing space conditioning, feeding into a pre-filter unit, and then ultimately into the HEPA diffusers at the room level. And again, very light coverage on that. So where we're currently at in the design, and as Dana mentioned, we're not completed yet, so this isn't the presentation where we say these are all the great things we did. We're still in process here. But we've got a concept which somewhat mimics what they've got out there. We've got a recirculating air handling unit on the level, on the mezzanine above, or on the floor above, boxed in here. We've got a number of HEPA filter units in the ceiling, and we are, at about 26 air changes per hour, so kind of closely matching what they've got in their existing lab for that high volume space. We are looking at higher ceiling coverage on the clean room HEPA filters at this point. So it's just a little diagram. Another thing then, as we met with the researchers, we determined that a lot of their equipment has components that are separate from the experiment itself. So there's cryogen coolers and such that we can put in a space that's an equipment chase, so to noisy and high heat producing equipment can sit in the chase adjacent to the clean room. So we'll filter out the air of the clean room, transfer it into that chase, and then exhaust it out of that chase. So this is the status of where we're at now. Another thing that as we met with the researchers, and this was primarily Perkins and Will, but I'll say to Dana coming back to present it, you know, a lot of these different researchers each had similar pieces of equipment. So right now there's some redundancy. They each have this piece of equipment in their lab because they're scattered all over the place. But now as things come together, they can share some of that equipment in one common clean room. So that helped to bring the square footage of the building down to assist without getting it back on budget.
Or they had different pieces, but same spatial requirements, so we're able to consolidate.
And this is just an isometric of that core lab. Has all sorts of different measuring equipment and sensitive stuff in there. And hand it back to Dan.
Yeah. All right.
So the last case study, I was just checking time. We do want to wrap up here for some Q&A. But so the hybrid lab. So you know, I put the little caption there. We developed the hybrid lab model, and we developed it together. It was actually through a lot of inquiry. How is the space going to be used, and really how can we optimize all of the features of these hybrid labs. So they are primarily located on the upper level, level 1 of the IERC. And so we started out by, like most lab projects, actually walking and getting to understand what their existing space conditions are. So this just gives you an example of the current space in Wilson Hall on level 13. They're also located in other buildings on campus as well. But it's a mix of a lot of electronic equipment, a lot of workspace, computing required. And so what we are noticing is you need a lot of bench space, you need some certain adjacencies, but the equipment that's really in these labs is a little bit different than some of the equipment that's going in some of the other labs. So we can look at this environment not necessarily all as enclosed cellular laboratories, but we had an opportunity to, what I felt like is lift off the ceiling and lift off some of the walls and start to look at a workspace model that accomplishes their laboratory needs and requirements while looking at a very forward-thinking workspace that's very adaptable and flexible for Fermilab's needs. And this took not just one or two people looking at these requirements and the solutions. We did host a handful of our multidisciplinary work sessions. So we had, it's like Tom Mozino, give a little shout out to you, they're in the picture, design principal from the architecture side, PA, so we had the technical team involved, also our workplace strategy and interiors team. We all gathered around to really understand how these spaces may function and how they're organized to ensure that we're meeting the scientific needs as well as looking at the building holistically. So just a sketch of how it's starting to overlay for these hybrid labs. So this is a sketch, a current sketch of our thinking. So we're having to include all of these requirements into what may look like at first blush more of a workplace setting. We're incorporating the laboratory modules, so laboratory benches, and making sure the surfaces are meeting the needs. A lot of flexible environment space, so they can move the server racks and various racks of equipment in and out of their working environment. It's a very hard working space. We're looking at light levels, we're looking at ventilation rates, and just ensuring all of those space parameters meet science requirements, but then also we're all humans and all of this thoughts of collaboration, so we want to make sure we can open up that space and make it a very marquee, flexible environment for Fermilab. And as we are iterating too, we worked a lot with Jonathan and the team to understand who all is going in the space, how many people will be working in the space at one time, and that's actually we're still working through that completely, but there's been a lot of analysis on how they're working, splitting their time between these hybrid lab environments and their office space and their workstations and their labs. And so there's a couple models that are surfacing, and the furniture configurations will adapt within that armature to reflect that, whether it's this is a dedicated space for one person, whether multiple people are sharing this, and what does that do to the design? So working within that very flexible lab module of 11 feet and setting up the furniture for multiple uses is really the direction that we head. All right, so that concludes it. So kick it off with Q&A from the audience. Yes.
What does the name hybrid lab refer to? Hybrid pretty what?
It's a hybrid lab is a workstation and a testing lab. Is that fair? That's how it all arrived. We were looking at those cellular laboratories, which we do have some of those for the special requirements of the researchers that are using the hybrid lab, but we wanted to pull them out of those labs. So it became this intermediate space between let's say a 200 or 300 square foot testing lab and an office. It's not a workstation, so it was really a hybrid approach. So the name just stuck. During the iteration, like, it's a hybrid. Okay. So then they became the hybrid labs.
Is the ventilation more of an office type setting, or is it still single pass like a traditional lab? How they handle that?
We're looking at single pass.
So in the hybrid labs themselves are more office, because they're electronics labs.
Yeah.
There's not soldering going on in those spaces. The electric engineering labs that are enclosed may or may not be single pass depending on what the activity is in those labs.
But the flexible ones can recirculate, or?
Flexible ones are recirculating or treated more like office space.
So, in your clean rooms, have you looked at the high airflow rates and the kind of noise and other issues that they generate in space? Are these issues for those spaces at all? What kind of activities are going on? Are they fabrication activities or are they assembly activities?
A number of different activities, and quite frankly, some of these labs, it's interesting because the science people think they know what they're going to be doing when this building is available in 3 years from now, but they're designing and setting up experiments constantly. Noise has not been a criteria that we've discussed at this point, but we're looking for those to be NC40-ish.
Yeah, laudable and
Yeah.
noise that instrumentation in space.
But for the instrumentation we have, we're having separated clean power.
No, I don't think so. Rated by airflow.
No.
Physical vibration.
That shouldn't be, it certainly hasn't been a problem. I mean, we're doing wire bonding, for example, which, is not that, it's not that sensitive for that.
So back in 2005, when we were building our first major cleanroom project, CNF, we came up with the, I don't think anybody kind of before, we came up with the idea of variable air volume cleanrooms. And I think I've seen some articles in subsequent years, people have tried to do this. But basically, we're watching particle count in space. And we're modulating those units to maintain a certain particle count level, which we usually have well below that threshold. The energy savings are incredibly, relative to the clean rooms, they're substantial, 30 horsepower motors running at 1,000 to 1,500 watts. But the advantage to the activity in the clean room has been quieter, less kind of airborne or air-induced vibration to some of the instrumentation. So if you're interested,
Yeah,
and
but it's
we've done another clean room since then. We've
Okay.
moved that to other spaces later.
we've been working with health and safety to determine, what the criteria are. We're looking right now at a strategy to turn them back at night, at least.
Well, we're doing
There's
it
no
while you're
activity.
in there, right?
Okay.
But there's a threshold set.
Yeah.
I mean, we dump below a certain bound, and when they run in, they do regular surveys of the room, independent surveys that verify cleanliness, and we're like an order of magnitude later. These are 100, 1,000. I don't think there's any 10,000.
We're also using room within a room, clean room spaces where we need a higher cleanliness level.
Yeah. But the noise does wear on you. Just,
Sure.
Get there.
Yeah.
I had a question about the architectural, but I didn't realize it may be kind of difficult for you to answer because of the pull out from architecture drawings. But these spaces were pulled out of 13th floor, right? You said it was small.
Some of them. Yes.
Yeah, so that, I was just curious how you, Wilson Hall within accounting for the age of kind of this similar collaborative space or collaborative spirit. I was just wondering architecturally how you connected back to Wilson Hall with the new addition or recreated the collaborative environment in the new addition. And again, if you can't speak to, drawings, that's fine.
I don't know about the talking paper per se, but, Wilson Hall and collaboration happens in a lot of different ways. So if you're talking specifically about the atrium, is that where you're, Hans?
Yeah.
Connects the floors?
Right.
Okay, so we looked at a lot of different schemes on how we are going to look at that connectivity within the IERC itself and the function of moving through the space. We arrived at a solution to create, instead of doing an open to below scenario for space efficiency, we actually just looked really closely at where we're creating the stair locations and some monumental stair to encourage moving up and down the building. During the initial concepts, we were actually 3 stories, so even reducing the building down to 2-story is inherently creating more of an easier sequence moving up and down the building. As far as the connection to Wilson Hall, which is actually a big part of the architecture and the expression, that's still being worked through, actually, because there's a lot of moving parts, as you can imagine, connecting to Wilson Hall, not just symbolically, but from a building function standpoint. So that's something we're paying a lot of close attention to. So we want to make sure that we're collecting all these requirements, knowing that we need to get that just right. Right, Ronnie? That's what just right.
I guess my comment is along similar lines. When I go to Fermilab, I feel like Wilson Hall is quite collaborative. Your comment about the social cross-section being vanishingly small for particle physicists that you've well taken. But how the hybrid lab seems opposed to that, as compared to, say, open space planning, where you have people working together in one area and perhaps having office space in it, but along the side, so people can see what one another are doing, at least while the work is happening. Why go to this sort of pod hybrid type thing with an isolated person or 2 people in a cell, as compared to, say, a more open plan workspace where I can look across and see what we happen to be working on and see the other activity? Because Fermilab always felt really isolated as soon as I left Wilson Hall. I go to the testing areas or I go to the little village. It feels like you never see another soul around in the sort of Quantum Hut or basement fab lab or something. Why the cells?
So I'm going to make sure I'm capturing your comment correctly. So you're viewing the hybrid lab with that modulation, creating that rhythm is more cellular than perhaps it could be?
Yeah, so I guess are the walls between the different modules?
There's not. It's
Okay.
just a furniture solution only.
It's a furniture system. Okay,
Mhm.
all wall office.
Yep. So there will be some barriers, because we did hear that, a lot of it will be research work, but there's an element of, obviously, focus. So what we wanted to do is, this is mostly furniture. There's an opportunity if we wanted to put a sort of a barrier, whether it's a pegboard or some sort of surface that they can use to write, but it would be removable. All of these, all the power and any kind of service connections are happening along the wall. So in theory, Greg, you could remove this bench or moving around within the space and creating these larger pod environments.
So I think also for a lot of our engineers have a desk and they have a bench in their office. And so for a lot of people, we're actually going to be doing is we're going to have their office with a desk for their heads down thinking space, and then actually have some space in one of these labs. So in fact, I think it's actually the opposite. What we're doing is we're getting people out of their offices and into this. There's still, you still need your space because you have the thing you're working on, but it is a more open environment. There are people coming down the hallway, hey Charlie, what about X? And so I think actually that's really to bring about that kind of collaboration. Going back to the previous question about the connection to Wilson Hall, is that this was really very important to us, why we put the building where we did. That it wasn't just going to be nearby, it wasn't going to be some long bridge, over some other piece of the facility, but really right there, so the scientists who are, up thinking lofty thoughts can, come downstairs and, get their hands into the experiment without having to get in the car and drive across the campus and make an appointment. So it really is to serve that kind of work collaborative mission.
So for the neutrino experiment, you mentioned a budget of about $3 billion.
Yeah.
But is that internationally funded or is that all DOE funded?
So that. Why do we do this later? This is like really inside baseball. I mean, you can tell you the deal. Well, okay. So the LBNF Dune project is $2.6 billion, which includes all of the facility and then the U.S. contributions to the experiment. The experiment is the facility is a U.S. project with international contributions and partners. The experiment is an international collaboration in which the U.S. is contributing component.
And the same model used for the internal?
The experiment is more of the model used for LHC. And then KIP 2 is, again, a U.S. project with really substantial international contributions.
How are you collaborating with the planning to collaborate? Well, we're talking about collaboration. You'd obviously have to collaborate internationally with all those other partners. When they started APS in Argonne, they set up what they called a user organization instead of collaborative access teams. Are you thinking of something like that? Or?
So again, with the experiment, it's one experiment that has an international collaboration. It's an international collaboration. They have their experimental board. They have a committee of the funding agencies that meets. I think they're actually meeting today, where the funding agencies get together, and so they have all those kinds of international structures. In the case of the facility and the accelerator, it's a different kind of process. That's more of a we don't use the term, but it's more of an MOU kind of process.
Any more questions?
So did you come into this project with a standard set of metrics per PI that you were trying to meet, and then you're doing this study, those metrics change a little bit? Was it a PI plus 6 plus 6 linear feet of bench?
We don't really have PIs. So,
okay, so in the basic science setting that would be that, but did you have metrics that you into this work?
So we didn't go in with a fixed set of metrics. What we did was we looked at the activities we had and looked how we wanted to project those activities forward and how much space was an engineer using, different kinds of engineers. There's some engineers that are just in their office and designing, and then they have a tech who works with them, or a designer. There are some people that they're back and forth from the desk to the lab. So looking at how people were using space, accounting for the fact that we have a lot of clutter bugs, and we could really make them clean up a little bit and it wouldn't kill them. But really we did an assessment of how people use space, and we actually had a rather substantial database of what were our different program elements and what were the space needs for those program elements, and a first pass at what the services that were needed, whether it was how much power, whether it was clean power, whether we needed dry nitrogen, processed water, all of those kinds of questions. And then we went through we had then this rather large set of wish list, and then we had to figure out what program fit in the budget and what elements with those space needs we could make work.
At one point, we had a discussion for a minute that we are used to working with academic institutions where they do have a PI plus a certain amount of team members, and that comprises of different people. We are not PI based. It's a very different way to, if you think about the way they're structured, and it was the science capacity and science capabilities is the way that we looked at organizing and getting these groups of spaces.
Probably more of an industrial model. We have an electrical engineering department. It has groups. They have specialties. But those groups are not necessarily working on a single research program. So what's going to happen, they're going to work on a project, and they're going to, some investigator or group of investigators are going to come work with them and say, okay, we have this R&D project, can you design this board for me? Of course, they ask, do you have money? And then that may lead into something else, which becomes a development project, which becomes a construction project. We're going to then design something for production, build 150 modules, test them, send them to the experiment for installation, and then support them through operations. And so people are coming up and down on projects all the time and supporting things from 10 or 20 years ago, even while they're still doing it. So it's a different kind of model for our engineering staff.
All right. Okay, so I think it's time to break out. So I appreciate all of the conversation. Thanks for the questions. And we're going to go ahead and take our posts here in the various groups. We do have alcoholic and non-alcoholic refreshments.